I'm going to really kick off straight away because data is
Sure.
something I'm quite passionate about. I know you're passionate about it. We both believe there's a lot that you can do with data, and especially to sort of feed in, and support teachers and giving them greater insights into what's happening for individual children. But yeah, let's start off with, you've built Century Tech. You're the CEO of Century Tech and founder, which is fantastic. And tell us a little bit about the background. Why did you start Century Tech, and where do you see the key benefits, I guess, of what the value offers to teachers?
Yeah, sure. So it was very simple. It started with a problem-oriented approach. So I was in a situation where I taught for a couple of years. I had the reason I left was because I found myself actually doing a lot of repetitive tasks throughout the year, and then the same again the following year. And actually it was in my third year that I just said, I don't think I'm adding value by spending my time in this particular way. I had a really diverse range of students. So students that were really excelling, and I think everyone's capable and everyone is really bright in their own way, I think, but they were particularly taking on the subject really well. And then I had some who really struggled, and actually there was one particular one who was a research student who needed a lot of attention. And I really wanted to give it to her. But the problem was that I was bogged down with so much admin and so much marking and things that, I think that there are some areas where the marking needed to be done by me because I needed to understand in long form assessment, for example, context, right? And that was really important. But there were some areas on the knowledge base, and think, I don't really necessarily think we need to get into the debate, but not, they're not mutually exclusive. They overlap knowledge and skills. But the idea was that there were some areas where I was doing so much repetitive marking, assessing. I was up really late at night, up on weekends, and then also just figuring out, I always wanted to make the next lesson a lot better, right? So, and what can I take from my practical experience and bring it into the classroom to make it really exciting? But there was a lot less time for that, and it wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to spend the time doing it. It's just I had a timetable. Right, so the idea was you have this amount of time to teach X, and then you need to deliver Y, and I found that there was so much more that I had to offer that I was really passionate about offering, that I really enjoyed, but actually it felt like the system just didn't allow me to do that. So I came away from that thinking, oh, that's a real shame, and I learned from that experience. There was still no intention to start anything. I then, I was an entrepreneur. I worked with a lot of colleges on entrepreneurship and skills-based learning. I learned a lot from working with colleges. And then I just ended up in this position where I was an advisory board member to the Secretary of State for Business Innovation and Skills. And that led to this one meeting where there was this meeting with sort of DFE and BIS, and they mentioned this statistic, and it was about children not performing well enough in literacy and numeracy in our schools here. At the time, I happened to be funding a lot of schools in Commonwealth countries. And it was just because what I was doing at the time had a really charitable aspect. Everything that I've done, I've always tried to do something that is all about mostly giving back and improving lives, just because that's been my purpose since I was a child. And it's a boring story, but I sort of, now I'm East African Indian. I grew up, I come from a very, from a background where I understand how spoilt I am. I really am. And I think it's okay. I've got to be, we have to be honest about what we've had. We've had really difficult times as well. And that's a whole other conversation on sort of business and entrepreneurship and my parents and my family and what they've done. So I won't go into that. But I've seen really difficult times, but I've also had a really privileged upbringing. And what I experienced in East Africa was that people really have nothing compared to what I had. So I said, in my whole life, I just want to do things where I'm trying to improve things, particularly for those from disadvantaged backgrounds, but also just trying to innovate and make things better. So anyway, I ended up in this position where I learned about literacy and numeracy, and I was funding these schools. And I thought, well, what's the point of funding schools in these countries where they're all, their models follow the British model because they happen to be in the Commonwealth, right? And I didn't know about all of the major issues on the front line of education at the time. You make assumptions, don't you? And I wanted to learn more and figure out what was going on. And there was that old adage that really just made me feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. And it was the old adage of, rather than give a man a fish, you should teach him how to fish, right? And we've all heard that one. And I thought, well, I'm giving a man a fish. I'm giving people food. We're literally serving up millions of meals, right? We are providing vaccines, which I think is really important. but we are just providing these schools that aren't fixing these fundamental issues. So and then it just came down to this big research sort of working group, I'd like to call it. It was me and some really amazing help actually from some senior civil servants in the Department for Business, where we went out into schools. I asked lots of questions. I was thoroughly annoying to lots of people, asking lots and lots of questions, but they were amazing, because actually for them it was really cathartic to be able to tell somebody, well, this is actually what it's like day to day. And I figured out that these two problems, every school is different, every teacher is different, every child is different, and that has to be respected. But there were a couple of common elements, no matter whether I went to the best schools in the country or the most challenged. And those were this one size fits all delivery, and this need for personalisation. When I talk about personalisation, I don't mean, taking a cohort of students where 50% of them go on the same path and the other 50% go on another. I literally mean, what does the individual need? True personalisation, this need for differentiation, and the fact that teachers do it. Let's not try and pretend they don't. They do offer it. It absolutely exhausts them, and every teacher will go home and think, I wish I could do a little bit more. Absolutely. So it's not because of a lack of intention, and not because they're actually managing to offer that differentiation. It's the fact that the system is sort of rigged against them with the way that it's designed, and it might have worked for a different time, not working. And then the second was that we really value data, and you talked about your passion for data, but we don't value data for data's sake, right? We don't just like seeing lots of numbers and feeling like we're really clever looking at a spreadsheet. The idea is that what can it tell us, and how can it inform us, so that we can improve, and that we can show and demonstrate that we are achieving the right standards and levels for students as they continue throughout their formal education. So the idea was, okay, well, if that's really important, then just what can we do from trying to solve those problems, and what can we create to make life easier? And so it was very much a, what's possible, and it was an open, it's a blank sheet of paper. It wasn't a let's look at technology, let's look at this sort of snazzy, more intelligent, complex technology that other people are using. It just happened to be that these technologies have made significant differences in other sectors, and we all use them every day, no matter how skeptical we might be about the technology in education. We're making our own personal lives better and easier, potentially with it. Not always. There are some technologies where you would argue, well, I wish that didn't exist, or that might have created more problems than solving problems. But I think the point was, what can we do? So I looked at my phone. I had more tech on there than they did in schools. The schools had moved to the interactive whiteboard. You could see them using it. Some were using it in the way that they could with the full potential of the whiteboard. Some were just using it as frankly, a blackboard. And it was more of a question of how can we make this work? So I went back to the drawing board and basically looked at the problems in a typical sort of user and design-led thinking approach, right? Where you look at the problems, and came up with the idea that if we utilize technology that use the same technology, complex technology that we use in search, for example, when we're searching for answers on the internet, or when we're investing, and I'm talking about something a bit more complex than Amazon Web Basket or Netflix movie recommendations, a bit more than just machine learning, where you're looking at patterns in how people behave and then lumping them in the same bucket, if you like, and then take what we understand about education, so the delivery of education, what's really important in the content, how should that be structured. We should focus on learning and not assessment. That was really key in this process. It was, if we just focus on assessment and doing better with grades, while that is important, right, and while that we understand it is important, at the end of the day, we're not going to escape the fact that people do have to take those GCSEs, at the end of the day. That shouldn't be the tail that wags the dog. It's part of the process, but learning is far more important. So the holy grail of education is how we can allow our children to learn in a way that will, encourage them in terms of lifelong learning and motivate them and engage them, have a love of learning, but also just give them the opportunities that they deserve when they leave formal education. So how do we basically build something that allows us to personalize that for every individual? Well, personalization and AI go hand in hand in terms of what we've seen in other sectors. And then because AI relies on big data, the idea is, well, data, we've just been talking about data and data collection and data analysis. So how can we then analyze that and save teacher time? So that was basically how I came about it. And it just happened to be that we looked globally for a system that potentially could bring to the UK, that we could suggest. I've been on trips, particularly with trade missions and the Mayor's office, and tried to understand this technology. Unfortunately, we were in a situation in 2012 to 2014 where that technology just simply wasn't available for education, and so it was just a decision. It was how are we going to do this? And the answer was, well, either I go ahead and try and build this thing and get the best educators that I know and that I can hire to be half of the company, so it is built by teachers, but I also need the best of engineering capability. So then it just became essentially creating a list and a plan, as we all do, and ticking off that list and saying, okay, we're gonna build this. And I'm really proud that we've built this in Britain. I'm really proud of British technology innovation, and I do think that we've built something extraordinary in this country with engineers and teachers from the country, and it's something that is going to continue to grow and develop.
I think it's fantastic. So I do a lot of product management training, so facilitate training, and one of the things I always talk about is that sort of, that Ford thing where everyone says, Ford, when he basically built the car, said, if I talk to people, then I would have created a faster horse. But actually, he was doing exactly what you just did, which is understand the problem first, which actually people want to get from A to B quicker, and then looked at technology and said, what can do this? And that's what we all should be doing always, is looking at the pain point and saying, how can we solve this problem with the latest technology? And exactly.
Yeah, and I think, and in education, what's really interesting, and I always refer to Ford as well, and that quote quite often, particularly when we're talking about change management, but is that, this has not been positioned as a tool that does everything, and it isn't, right? So it's about taking the best of what we know teachers provide, the best of what we know teaching assistants provide, the best of how we understand children need to be in a certain environment. And it's about augmenting that. And people get really confused, particularly on social media. I think there's just like a handful of people that really do not understand this. But I think everyone understands the power of teachers. I mean, I've written an entire book where actually it's not about technology, and there's a real misunderstanding that it is. There's one chapter on technology. But it's about the power of teachers and who they are. So when you spend time in schools and with teachers and observe them and watch them through lessons after lessons, days after days, you can start to see those interactions, because teachers are different, right? There are some teachers that love to stand at the front and are fantastic at standing from the front, and they will engage the entire class. And actually, they'll have probably achieved a lot in front of the class, whereas there are some, there are some where the teachers, the kids are just staring at us, pin drop silence, and they do manage to stand in front of the class and do that delivery really, really well. There are some who prefer to, the kids the children are focused on a task and they'll walk around the room and have those quick, sort of one-to-one interactions, and they're incredibly powerful interventions. And it's about understanding that there are different styles. So when this tool has been developed, it's been developed in a way that can be used flexibly, but it is not a replacement. And the idea that, and I know with COVID, we have learned a lot during the last year. People have been using some tools on their own and they have missed out. And I think that we've got to be clear, it's not the same. And education, and your education has, and when we think, you've got to just remember, we were all in nappies once. We were all children once. When we were at school, would we have defined our education as just simply the transfer of information into knowledge in our brains? Was that it? Because that is doing a real disservice to actually what schools provide as a whole. And that actually would be saying that you're leaning towards the argument that education is simply knowledge-based, which is nonsense, right? And so it's so much more than that. And there are some things you can't teach with an AI, right? Where actually that peer-to-peer interaction between people, that collaboration, is the skill that they need to nurture, and the skill that you want maturing in front of you. There are people that complain, well, they don't call anymore, they don't speak anymore, they just text anymore. They just text now, and that's what they're doing. And we're losing skill sets when people are doing that. Well, how do you encourage, there were schools like School 21 that focus on oracy, and So as sort of as the new literacy, and I know there's a big talk, you know, about from Rethink Assessment about this, which I believe is available. And I think people should listen to it. And if they don't have time, listen to the beginning of it, where Robert Halfon speaks and what he talks about in terms of his vision about how things can be. We have to respect that so much has to be delivered from this sector. And so AI is a tool to personalize, to help personalize, and to provide data is helping in those respects. And as you say, it's about providing that engine and that vehicle rather than asking for a faster horse, not just employing more teachers or burning them, getting them to work later, trying to provide that solution. And then how do you use that as a tool and then build your system around the teachers with that tool? Because it's got to be around the teachers and the children, right? The AI is not the central tool, but how can you use that with your MIS, you know, with all these other systems that you have to create an ecosystem that truly works, but that truly delivers what you want to deliver at the end of the day to the stakeholders that matter and to those children, and to be able to tell their parents that this is essentially what we've been able to provide them.